What can you read into what has been said by the U.S. military about this incident? What do you believe transpired?
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you. That which transpired is probably a combination of factors. One likely magnified by human error in an era when you have a sustained U.S. force presence in a region consistently coming under fire and consistently coming under fire in some of the largest maritime military engagements since the end of World War II for the United States. So that's the scale of what we have to consider going on here. Reportedly, prior to these two FA-18 aircraft getting mistakenly shot down by the U.S. aircraft carrier in the region, in the Red Sea, it was reported that the Houthis had launched several different types of suicide drones, as well as land attack cruise missiles, or anti-ship cruise missiles, we should say more properly. The Islamic Republic of Iran has been behind this capability of the Houthis to have this extended arm into the Red Sea for many years now, and they've been firing at commercial vessels, military vessels, you name it, reportedly over 100 times in the past year and a few months now.
Yeah, that is a lot. And of course, good detail on what happened or what we know happened. Of course, they are saying, Central Command saying in a statement that the guided missile cruiser, the USS Gettysburg, which is a part of the USS Harry S. Truman Carrier Strike Group, mistakenly fired on and hit the F-18 there. And you mentioned just the human error and the error in which it is. And it is a very dangerous region. Can you describe the Red Sea? Because we've detailed it over with different vessels being moving through the area with U.S. kind of guidance as well. How dangerous is it currently?
Well, I would say it's quite dangerous because you have several multinational maritime coalitions there. Unfortunately, not with countries that have significant Red Sea borders. Here I'm looking to Egypt and Saudi Arabia because you have a significant U.S., U.K., and EU force presence in the region, trying to make sure that this critical waterway through, which a significant percent of global trade goes through, not just energy trade, but the commodities trade as well, is able to remain open. The Islamic Republic of Iran had helped the Houthis in Yemen a little bit after October 7th, after the Iran-backed Hamas terror attacks against Israel on that day, to slowly begin to widen the war. And starting on October 19th with Houthi, that's the rebels in Yemen backed by Iran, strikes on Israeli territory. And then starting in early November of last year, strikes in the maritime domain. They've been able to try to put their finger on the jugular of global maritime trade to get international pressure to halt Israel's military moves against the Iran-backed terrorists in Gaza. So it was an attempt to widen the war. It was an attempt to exactly do what we see today, which is imperil multinational coalition forces in the region that naturally, unfortunately, do relate to these kind of things, like situations where human error would make themselves apparent.
And just for people that may not be aware, when you hear friendly fire, obviously it's potentially U.S. on U.S., unfortunate shooting at them down there from the Red Sea. How common is that? How often do we see friendly fire impact in war?
Fortunately, these days with the U.S. forces, let's just segment them out of other armed forces when looking at this globally. You do have instances, but you have significantly fewer instances than one would expect. A, given the number of war zones around the world. B, given the number of U.S. Military bases, training missions, and even places where active duty forces are indeed present. So the fact that this doesn't happen as often as one might think it happened, given, again, the scale, the scope, and the size of the U.S. force presence around the world, and the number of threats or hotspots that exist, all points to one conclusion, which is the professionalism of the U.S. armed forces. But nonetheless, these things can happen, do happen. They're non-zero chances, and they have to be studied and mitigated. And in a situation like this, where you have everybody being able to communicate via radio and the same frequency, that human error thesis makes itself very apparent, which would, on the back end of this, require folks to kind of double down on training and assess the situation ex post, see what went wrong.
Yeah, that is so very good. And these are split-second decisions in the moment when they're so hostile environment that they work in. And of course, we also want to reiterate both pilots, they were recovered alive, although one did suffer minor injuries. So some good news there ultimately on this Sunday. Let's talk about another thing that transpired in Yemen. And I want to put up this post as well from the U.S. Central Command saying CENTCOM conducted airstrikes against the Iran-backed Houthi missile storage and command control facilities in Yemen. And you can see just some of these images coming in right now from the U.S. military as well, as they conducted these deliberate strikes to disrupt and degrade Houthi operations, such as attacks against U.S. Navy warships, merchant vessels into the southern Red Sea. When you hear something like this, what kind of operation unfolded for the U.S. and was it a success?
Well, these are operations that we have seen before from the U.S. and the U.K. to a different degree from the Israelis against the Houthis in Yemen. And these are largely in the category of breaking things rather than the military category of killing people. And the U.S. has been quite careful in its strikes in Yemen to not necessarily go after Houthi leadership, but to rather go after the military capabilities that the Houthis continue to build domestically, reverse engineer domestically, put together domestically, as well as get pieces or whole systems from their patriot, which is the Islamic Republic of Iran. I mean, the Houthis are the only proxy of Iran with anti-ship ballistic missiles. They have another significant anti-ship capability, which is their anti-ship cruise missiles, and they're doubling down of the use of suicide drones and unmanned underwater vehicles, and even unmanned boats, like fast boats, for example, that don't require someone to actually man them. So they are facing right now, U.S. forces are facing a full spectrum threat. And the way the U.S. has gone after dealing with this full spectrum threat is to go after the supply side. And I think 1 year out into this operation, where both A, it's been very expensive for the U.S. to continue to successfully intercept these projectiles, and B, to try to respond in kind against the production facilities, launch facilities, and storage facilities, it may be time for the U.S. to have to consider a different type of strike package in Yemen if it's going to really impact the calculus of Houthi leaders to keep launching these projectiles.
And let's just follow up on that, because obviously you mentioned the kind of aspect of them damaging things, taking things out in terms of these missile storage. What would that line be that they need to reevaluate in the future to reassess the task, the strategy around this?
Well, certainly it would be riskier, and that risk would move from, again, breaking things or going after things to going after individuals, targeted strikes against individuals, much like the U.S. had done in places like in Iraq and Syria, going after specific commanders of Iran-backed Shia militia groups that really used to go across that border with quite a bit of frequency, coordinating a whole series of rocket and mortar and IRAM and drone attacks against various facilities housing U.S. forces. Only when these leaders are targeted do you see a blip or a lull in some of these attacks. And then that's when politics can enter the fray, and that's where a military win can help you lock in a political win later on. No one is saying that this is the perfect solution or the one-off answer to ending Houthi strikes in Yemen, but it certainly would be a game changer if the U.S. deepened the kind of military operations it's been engaging in against a whole host of Houthi facilities and infrastructure for over a year. I mean, the U.S. has even used, I believe, B-2 bombers to try to penetrate buried, hardened underground subterranean missile depots, and yet Houthis still are firing. So there is a need to really course correct if we're trying to alter the Houthi calculus in Yemen.
Yeah, that is a very good point. And of course, this also comes within just days after the Israeli prime minister on Sunday vowed to retaliate after the Houthi militia fired a missile at Tel Aviv. You're looking live there. Of course, he warned Israel would target what is described as the last remaining arm of the axis of evil of Iran. Also talked about the fact there would be forced determination and sophistication in a retaliation moment. And when we're talking about this, those incidents with the U.S. Central Command talking about the attack there, the precision strike on a missile storage in Yemen against the Houthis, and also the attack by the Houthis in Tel Aviv. These are unrelated incidents, and it's just a little bit of a fog of war because the incidents happen so quickly, but there's no relation in your mind, right?
There is something of a relation, meaning that the U.S. has been, the Houthis have been going after U.S. Military vessels in the region, but also international shipping in the region, but also different aspects of Israeli territory. If you remember, several months back, there was a Houthi drone that actually killed one person that they had actually fired over a significant distance and came into Israel, not from the south or not from the east, but from the west. So over into the Mediterranean, taking a circuitous route to try to find an empty area in the patchwork of layered air and missile defense systems. So the U.S. maritime campaign against the Houthis is not in parallel to what the Israelis have, but it's quite similar to what the Israelis have. The Israelis have gone after oil refineries in the past, missile depots in the past, and also allegedly after Houthi leadership. There's just simply been a lot less exchange of fire from the Israelis against the Houthis than the Americans against the Houthis. But these are parallel, similar, but not the same types of operations the Israelis and Americans are engaging.
Yeah, a lot to keep up with in that region surrounding Israel as well. All right, BBT, anything else that you're watching, anything else that you're monitoring over the next several weeks, obviously, as we head into the new year?
Well, certainly, if we're talking about the acts of resistance that the Israeli prime minister talked about gutting or cutting or handicapping, all eyes really do need to be on Syria, because the Islamic Republic has said that it will try to find a way back in. And one wonders if that will be with select PKK-linked Kurdish groups, particularly if the U.S. doesn't initially stand by some of its Kurdish partners, and pro-Turkish forces, SNA forces, do go after some of those Kurdish groups. You know, just because the Islamic Republic is down in the region does not mean it is out in the region. And with the Trump administration coming back into office in late January of next year, these are things, in addition to the resurrection of the maximum pressure campaign, that it's going to have to face and it's going to have to tackle.
Yeah, that is so very good. And of course, good that you mentioned Syria, because we watched Hamas and Hezbollah and Houthis and also Syria you have to keep an eye on as well.